Petrochemical Update. Hello. On behalf of BIC Magazine and our sponsor, Petrochemical Update, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar and roundtable discussion on addressing construction challenges to petrochemical projects in the U.S. Gulf Coast. This is Brady Porsche from BIC Magazine. Before I introduce today's discussion, a few brief housekeeping items. You can resize or hide any of the windows in the webinar console. For example, you can maximize the slide window for best visibility. Across the bottom, you'll see widgets to access resources related to the webinar, including a Q&A link to submit questions anytime during the presentation. The speakers will answer questions after each of three topical sections, and they'll answer many of the questions they did not have time to address by individual email in the coming week. If you experience any technical problems, go to the FAQ help page at bicmagazine.com and select the Webinar Attendee Help page under the Events menu. Again, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Petrochemical Update, producer of industry conferences like Petrochemical Engineering and Construction 2015, which takes place June 16th and 17th in New Orleans. The conference is going to gather senior heads of projects from the likes of Sasol, BASF, Dow Chemical, PPC Group, Chevron Phillips Chemical, LyondellBasell, Shell, Fluor, KBR, and many more to discuss new challenges facing petrochemical facility construction in the U.S. and strategies to overcome them. Go to petrochem-update.com/petrochemicals-construction for details on how to register. Our live audience will now see a new browser window displaying the official site of the event. And now if you'll click back over to your presentation window, it's my pleasure to introduce to you the moderator of today's discussion, Steve Cabano, President of Pathfinder. Steve?
Thanks, Brady, and welcome everyone. We've got an excellent group of both owner, contractor, as well as resource provider representatives on our panel today, and we'll introduce those individuals here in a second. I would like to just kind of give you a little bit of background on how we're going to actually facilitate this session here. There's three main topics that we'll address. One's more on execution strategies, one's focused on contracting and contracting approaches in today's environment, and then the third will address the resource issues that we've all been kind of talking about and many of us experiencing here over the last number of months, if not years, in executing projects. I'll be basically leading the questions. You have the ability to ask questions through the system. We'll try to field as many of those questions as possible, but we're going to try to keep each topic to about a 15-minute discussion and then move on to the next, and which includes the ability to ask questions in that time period for that specific topic, and then we'll have a wrap-up at the end, and I'll pass it back to Brady, and he'll close things out. A little bit more background on myself. Again, my name is Steve Cabano, President of Pathfinder, and we're a project management consulting firm that supports many of the owner activities in the petrochemical industry, both domestically and internationally. We do get to see kind of a good cross-section of what's going on in the industry, and we'll try to use that to facilitate some of the dialogue here. I'm going to get each of the participants to introduce themselves here. First would be Jeff Patterson from Dow. Jeff?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, this is Jeff Patterson, Dow Chemical. I currently have the role of the North American, Latin American Engineering Center leader. So basically, I'm responsible for all of our site engineering groups at our various manufacturing sites around the world. Excuse me. Previous to that, I had the global construction role, so kind of had the perspective of looking at the the smaller site projects that we do at our manufacturing sites, and also in the global construction role, did a lot of work around the world in various places. And previous to that was actually a practicing project engineer where I actually did real work until I got into some of the leadership roles. But it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Steve.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Representing on the contractor perspective from Jacobs, Manuel Junco. Manuel?
Hi, thank you, Steve. My role and responsibility at Jacobs is Group Vice President for the process, which includes refining, petrochemical, chemical, industries related to the U.S. and Latin America. My background is all, I spent the first 5 years of my career working at Monsanto as in operations, and then moved into the EPC industry, where I've been now over 30 years. And did a lot of projects, enjoy projects, love our industry. I think it's a great industry to be in. It's been a great career. So looking forward to the conversation today.
Thanks, Manuel. And representing NCCER is Don White. Don?
Thank you, Steve. My name is Don White. I'm President and CEO of NCCER. I grew up in the industry. I've been in education and training as it relates to the industry for over 30 years. Seen a lot of things. We see a lot of need around the workforce issues in our industry, and we're hoping to build those collaborations going forward to help solve them.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So let's dive right into the first question here, and this is really more directed towards the owner. So Jeff, we'll get you to kind of feedback on this one first. The topic here is really our owners' execution strategies changing due to what we see happening in the marketplace. And if we kind of build off of that, some of the items that we see is obviously there's an increased downstream capital investment programs by owners, especially in kind of the U.S. Gulf Coast or domestic U.S. marketplace. We also have kind of on depending on how you look at it, positive or negative side, we have fluctuating energy pricing and, how that may affect our execution strategies. And we also have, with that, those fluctuating energy prices, other parts of the industry, and primarily the upstream oil and gas industry, kind of slowing down some things, and how is that affecting kind of the execution approaches by owners in the petrochemical space. Jeff, why don't you see if you can address some of those issues?
Okay, now take a shot here, and I guess working for Dow Chemical, we're kind of in that that top bullet really impacts us, right? We're kind of on the downstream side, and actually it's interesting. If we were having this call probably 4 or 5 years ago, maybe we wouldn't be talking about huge investments on the U.S. Gulf Coast, right? We'd be talking about investments on another Gulf Coast, and it would be called either the Arabian or Persian Gulf, right? Depending on where you what side of it you sit on. So it really has. I mean, it's amazing. And I didn't mention I've been in this business 35 years. So I started when I was 12, so I'm really not too old yet. But it's been around a long time, and you watch the changes, right? And certainly the shale gas and the low cost feedstocks has been a huge game changer for the U.S. I mean, we built work in. We had Kuwait and Thailand and places, China, where we've built major facilities for Dow. And for us, I mean, for a company like us, it's all about the low-cost feedstocks, right? I mean, that's the name of the game. And so we're going to go build where those are. And it's really amazing that, with the change in the shale gas and the pricing that we're, most of that investment is now on the U.S. Gulf Coast. So that has certainly changed the nature of our investment strategy and where we're building stuff. And again, 5 years ago, I can remember leaders in Dow saying, we're never going to build another cracker on the Gulf Coast. And I see the floor guys on the phone saying, well, that's not true, right? We're building another one here in Freeport, Texas. So that whole dynamic has really changed where we're looking to invest. And so it says, now we're focused on the Gulf Coast. And so, with not necessarily the large investment over the years, I mean, now we're in a situation where we're building things where maybe, the resources aren't quite there, and some of the things that we may have been used to in the past are not there. So for us at Dow, I mean, we're probably, those, not everybody on the phone may be aware, but we're probably the largest, self-performing owner company on the planet, I suspect. I mean, we've got a very large internal engineering capability. So we do a lot of work ourselves, not just in the U.S., but globally. We've got a very global engineering organization. So we feel like we've got a pretty good, internal owner competency, which I think for a lot of companies, I think, have gotten kind of away from that, and we've kind of gone down the path a bit over the years. But now we're pretty much we've recognized that's a very good thing to have is owner competency, so you can efficiently contract and build things. So we typically do a lot of internal engineering, and then we do a lot of particularly on the North America, where we don't have the unit rate contracts or other things. We do a lot of lump sum construction contracting, and we do a lot of self-perform engineering or reimbursable engineering. And I think what you find now in some of the markets on the Gulf Coast is some of that lump sum strategy becomes challenging, particularly for some of the larger projects, because it's who can better take on the risk, the owner or the contractor, and typically, right, it's the owner that has the ability to take on that risk. So we've moved down the path, and again, I saw some of the Fluor guys on the phone. I mean, we're building big PDH unit and a cracker in Freeport, and those are reimbursable strategies, and we did that to try to make sure we had a resource pool that could work on the first project and then roll over to the second to the cracker project, and really find that was one of our strategies for attracting labor, was to be able to have a consistent body of work there for a number of years to bring people in. So maybe in years past, we might have looked at a more of a lump sum approach. That was kind of where we got to because of the market. And I think one of the things I'd say is, when we're going to talk about the resource challenges and some of the things there, but I there's really no silver bullets there, but I would tell everybody that one of the silver bullets is, regardless of the market, and particularly in this market where you've got a kind of a resource constraint on the construction side, doing good engineering is absolutely critical. If Ed Merrow from IPA was on the phone, if some of y'all have dealt with him, I mean, he would look the owners in the eye and the engineering companies and say, if you don't do good engineering, it doesn't matter how good of crafts and quality of stuff you have in the field. If your deliverables are bad, your deliverables are late, you've got poor execution strategies, you're going to have a problem in the field. So one of the things I would tell everybody is that getting the fundamentals right on the projects with the scopes, and I'm speaking from the engineering, from the owner side, so I'm kind of talking to myself too, right? That if you get the scopes right, you get the engineering right, the deliverables right, you're going to have a much better chance of being successful. Because I think one of the things we've learned over the years, and I think Ed from IPA would tell us, is a contracting strategy will not save a bad project, right? If the project's not good, if it's not the right project, you don't have the right execution strategy, the deliverables are wrong, doesn't matter what you're doing in the field, they're not going to have a chance to be successful. So I would tell you to focus on the front end, focus on getting the projects right, and then the contracting strategy is kind of a second order kind of thing. But again, I think in this market we've seen some changes in the strategies to some of the lump sum bidding that maybe we've done in the past is not so applicable anymore.
Jeff, just Steve here. The approach that Dow's taken in reference to maintaining its own internal project execution, planning and execution capability, is a little different than what others have seen in the marketplace these days. A lot of owners have downsized quite dramatically, and opted to outsource a lot of that front end activity, and then obviously the execution activity to the contractors in the world. What drove Dow to maintaining that execution strategy of keeping the internal resources in-house, or the front end and execution resources in-house?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I know we back in the day, I mean, I can remember DuPont in the IPA days back in early the late 900s and early 2000s was kind of the top of the heap as far as the project performance. I don't know, we were always very jealous of learning how do you get better, and so a lot of it was they had a very strong internal capability, and I know companies go through downsizings, and Dow's no different, or anybody's no different than that, where they go through the ups and downs. And I think we've managed, maybe the key is using the benchmarking. I'm not trying to be a salesman for IPA, but using the benchmarking, being able to show that you add value. I mean, I think you really have to kind of put it in terms of how do we deliver value to the business, right? Because it's not just saying, hey, we do great engineering and do projects, because sometimes for business guys that's interesting but not necessarily relevant. I think we've been able to show that by keeping that internal competency, we're delivering value, EBITDA dollars and value to the bottom line by being able to translate business and commercial strategies into plants that make the company money, and we've been able to do that. And I think the other part is we've had some good leadership, vision. I'll say a little bit visionary leadership in some of the Dow side that says, hey, everybody else may be getting out of that or downsizing, but there's value in maintaining that. So we're going to continue to maintain that internal core competency.
Manuel or Don, do you have any viewpoints on your end?
This is Manuel. I think one very interesting observation based on the comments made regarding Dow and their capability is a lot of the, because there has not been any work or significant work in the Gulf Coast, we're also seeing the situation where a lot of these owner companies have not done major projects in quite a while, and they really have lost that capability, and they struggle significantly to get projects off the ground and properly set up and doing the even just the basic things that you need to do for a project. And a lot of times what they do is they go out and hire very quickly people from different companies and organizations, and is from a contractor's perspective, it looks like a very disjointed effort to get a project going. So it's just an interesting observation that I thought about as I heard the conversation going on.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that, you mentioned size, but even the complexity of the projects today,
right.
We see it in a lot of our activities as well, is that, again, U.S.-based type project activity was not that abundant over the last number of years, and Jeff mentioned, the influence of the shale gas and so on. All these projects are coming back, and we haven't matured our resources here locally. Well, what we are doing is bringing international people back, and they're taking international protocols and trying to apply them domestically, and sometimes there's a disconnect there as well. Don, do you have any input on the kind of the owner's viewpoint of this? No, you're mostly on the resource. Nope. Okay. Jeff, is there anything else you'd like to add before we go on to the next question?
I might just make the comment. It was interesting about Manuel, about bringing people back from, and Steve, you said it about from some of the mega projects. I think if you come to Freeport and listen to some of the Dow leadership, you hear a lot of Dutch spoken, right? We tend to.
Yeah.
Interesting. We've had some of our expats, senior construction folks who were in Kuwait, who were in Thailand, and are now, we brought them back to the Gulf Coast. And so, but to the point, I mean, and I think, it's fair to say even as much capability and that we have tried to maintain within Dow, we're challenging some folks on some of these projects. We've got the two major, the PDH and the cracker, and then the 4 world-scale polyethylene, and we've got some people we're really stretching to do that. Now, and on the good side of that is I think we're getting some folks getting that opportunity to really step up and take on some big projects, and they're not having to basically leave home. They were able to do it kind of locally because we also have and for us, we have a big play in Saudi Aramco, or with Saudi Aramco in Saudi Arabia, that we're also in the process of finishing up. So we've got a large contingent of our folks there as well. But I'll end it by saying the other thing we're strategically talking about is as those folks, we finish that project in Saudi, and really we don't see too many mega projects, like these on the horizon for, next number of years. You'll see where the next piece is. But we're strategically thinking about how do we bring those people back into our organization and find places for them so they're available for that next, round of mega projects 3 or 4 years, whenever that comes. So I guess that message for everybody is, you got to strategically think about that, because it's interesting, Manuel, the comment you made where you're seeing a lot of owners that just, now all of a sudden we got work to do and we just don't have people to do it. And yeah, you can go in the marketplace and hire people, but they're not going to understand your culture. They're not going to necessarily understand your work processes, and it's going to be a challenge to be successful in that environment.
Right. Yeah, and we'll get in a little bit more on the contracting end of things in the next question. Just one, I want to field one of the questions that came from the audience, and Jeff, it's probably directed towards you. But in today's marketplace and executing these projects, if you look at the critical path of activities, are they following the traditional critical path, or are there new things that are popping up that are creating kind of the most critical activities within a timeline on a job?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think we've probably seen, you got the traditional ones, right? Some big alloy, long lead, material equipment and things. And I know we try to do a lot of global sourcing to try to get at that. But I think we've seen probably on even some things that you might think are easy to get, valves or transformers or some other things. We've seen some things pop up that suddenly become shorted, real long lead items that you maybe didn't expect. So I think my answer to the question in general would be yes. You got to kind of be careful in understanding kind of the market as it's changing on some of the other materials, because some of those that you might not historically have thought of as long lead will certainly pop up and become problems.
And I'm sure when we get into the last question, and Don will have some input on this, is don't underestimate the need for training and so on to address some of the resource issues that we'll talk about next.
Yeah, and that might be just a final comment. I mean, yep, go ahead. I'd say the final comment might be that you can't necessarily assume labor is an inexhaustible supply, right? That you can't just throw a bunch of people at it to make it up in the field if you have bad engineering or get behind.
Right. Okay, so I think we've actually kind of teed up, if you want, the next question here, which is really around contracting strategies and are they changing due to some of these market influences. And if you kind of take a look at just some of the bullet items that kind of support the environment here, we have obviously contractor availability as this work increase has kind of proliferated itself over the last number of years. It comes into question whether we have enough contractor resources to be able to execute it. And this one was addressed, I think, Jeff, when you mentioned it earlier, the ability for owners to really understand what their business case is and develop the front-end package so that we can hand it over to people that can execute well. And then, obviously, this goes into our third question as well, but just engineering construction resource availability. Are we overstretched in any markets, or has this downturn in the upstream market kind of helped out? So maybe I'll hand this one over to Manuel and see from a contractor perspective. Manuel, what are you seeing happening in the marketplace these days?
Well, I think, from a contractor availability, there is still plenty of capability in the market. Every project that we go out and bid, there are typically 3, 4, 5, or even 6 bidders. So I don't think there is a shortage. Obviously, the impact of the price of crude oil has helped that. But eventually, I would have, had that not happened, I would have foreseen a shortage of resources in the industry in general. We always focus on construction, but I think we would have seen some of that on the engineering and procurement side as well. In addition to the engineering side, I believe the suppliers, a lot of the suppliers never recovered from the 09 and 10 financial crisis, and they're still, I would say a lot of them are still in crisis and struggling to stay in business and meet commitments, and they lost a lot of capability. But in general, today, in today's market as it is today, there are plenty of contractors available to bid work and to meet the needs of the industry. From an owner perspective, as Jeff was saying, there are owners that have very defined processes and procedures, and they follow IPA, and they understand the criticality of getting the front end right and properly defined. But we are now seeing situations where that's not the case too. So, and again, I think it goes to the fact that a lot of companies have not done major projects in a while, and they're almost going through a learning or relearning in that area. And also from a contracting perspective, we're seeing lump sum conversions. We don't see a lot of straight lump sum. It's just something that hasn't really happened in the Gulf Coast, and there are enough opportunities that contractors, especially on the construction side, they can still go chase other work, and they don't have to take an enormous amount of risk, or in the case of the client or the owner, to price that risk into their project. And from a resource perspective, what I see from customers is a lot more interest on the team and the quality of the team. I know everybody wants the A team, but it goes beyond that. It goes, do I have the right team as a contractor to execute that particular project? And I see a lot more interest from the owner, almost, if you want to use the word, being picky about the team, because they want the right experience level for the project that they have in front of them. In some cases, because the owner may not have that experience, and they need the contractor to fill in those gaps.
And I get that. I'm sorry, Matt.
Go ahead.
I'm just going to ask you a question related to that. That you had mentioned just a few minutes ago about conversion contracts. So I'm assuming that is that the owner brings a contractor on in the front end under a reimbursable cost basis, and works with that contractor until a point of which we can define the project really well, and then convert it over to a lump sum. And if that's the case, is that a reaction to, I think what either you or Jeff said, is the lack of a capability within the owner to develop the front end package and then go out on a lump sum, or is there another influence that's driving that approach?
In the cases where I have seen that, which is a couple of instances, in one case is because the owner was going to require some financing at some point in the project as they advance the project, so that in itself, it was probably more of a bank requirement. In another case, it was more related to the owner not having the resources and the capability to manage a project of that size.
Yeah. Jeff or Don, you want to kind of give your perspective? We do have a couple of questions here, but it'll give you a chance to express any comments that you might have.
Yeah, this Jeff, I think the comment Manuel made about shops, I think that's about capability with vendors. I think that's one we've seen that they haven't necessarily added that extra capability. Maybe they add a shift, but not necessarily capability. And maybe part of it is, frankly, they've been burned in the past, right? So you tend to get a little bit shy there. But that tends to be, you see some bottlenecks there with some of the specific, shops and crafts and rotating equipment and things of not necessarily having the capacity and frankly, some of the expertise sometimes. The other comment I think, Manuel, you made about the market and the EPC, I know we've had some international contractors that have come into the Gulf Coast area to do some stuff. I know we had a specific one with us in the last several years on a joint venture, and coming in with kind of okay, well, this is what worked in Saudi, or this is what worked in China or some other location, and then now I'm going to try to bring that into Freeport, Texas, or a different place. I think, and without much success, right? And so I think part of it is whether you're coming into the U.S. or a U.S. company going out into doing something in Vietnam or doing something in Malaysia or somewhere you haven't necessarily been. I think understanding the local market, right, getting that intel, whether through a local EPC or through some other means. I mean, you really need to understand the market you're going into, and that's true. Two of us owners that are on the Gulf Coast and going out into the market maybe on larger projects than we're used to. I mean, understanding the market and where the risks, like you said, Manuel, where the risk is and who's willing to take it. If you don't understand that as an owner, you're probably going to make some really bad decisions.
Very true.
Yes. On the, I know this is the question that's been asked probably since the pyramid days, but it's a question that came from the audience. What do you see as the optimum contracting strategy in today's environment? I have my view on this, but I'll let you guys kind of tackle that one first.
I can go. I can go first on that. I think and Jeff alluded to this, in the Gulf Coast, I still believe the reimbursable approach is the best approach, mainly because it allows for gaps in the owner's organization. If you have a very well-defined project where you're going to almost copy a technology or a project that has been done before, then maybe a lump sum conversion is applicable to that. But that's just my my perception on that.
Yeah, I would, Manuel. I would tend to agree that, because it gets down to risk, right? I mean, and if you've got either through your not having enough internal capability or for whatever reason not having a really well defined as defined package, or maybe there's some gaps, or even just the concern about labor rates, right? What are labor rates going to do over a 2-year period? If you want, Manuel, if I want you to go bid on that, and I know Jacobs does a lot of reimbursable, but I mean, if I want somebody to bid on something and take all that risk, I mean, you're going to charge me for it, right? So I think it's a matter of understanding that market and saying, how best do I take the risk? And I think, again, the owner's going to be much more able generally to take that risk than kind of, if you ship it out there for a contractor to take, you're going to pay for it. And I think the other comment yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, the other thing I reinforce is, in all of that, good, solid engineering packages and good, deliverables and strategies. I mean, that's your biggest mitigation as an owner, is having a good, scope and a good engineering package, and then the contracting strategy will work. And if you throw you do reimbursable because you have a kind of a, crummy front end package or crummy engineering package, that's not going to necessarily save you either.
Yeah, and one of the aspects that I was going to add to this is, and I think, Jeff, you just alluded to it, that, if you take all the comments that we've talked about for the last half hour in reference to the struggles that we have in putting good front-end packages together, that in itself drives you to staying away from a lump sum type of environment. So that drives you to either going more towards this conversion basis or strictly reimbursable. The problem with the reimbursable we're seeing today is then you have on the owner's side their ability to actually administer a reimbursable cost contract, from a standpoint of contract administration, project controls, and so on, and that becomes a struggle because of the lack of resources on the owner's side to handle that. So that's when they sway back to a lump sum, and they might get themselves in a pickle by, going out lump sum because of those internal problems, but then not having the package well enough defined, and that tends to obviously create an environment where there's constant change and so on. And to be honest with you, one of the things that we're seeing as a potential trend, and we got to be cautious and try to address this as we look forward, is you've got very complex projects that are being planned by less experienced owners in a marketplace that's very heated, with contractors that obviously want to do a good job and so on, but might have lots of options. And we're entering into contracting strategies that maybe might not be the optimum, and we see an influx of potential claims coming down the line. And we have to make sure that we do whatever we can to put the proper claims mitigation techniques in place, even if we went with a less than optimum contracting strategy, to try to not get ourselves in that, because obviously very few people win in those claims environments. But any comments on that?
Yeah, Steve, I have a comment on, my philosophy is you should run any project as if it was a lump sum, and you'll typically have a successful project. The other side of the coin is lump sum it's not a magic bullet. You still have to manage it. You still have to contractually make sure that things are getting done. Otherwise, you could end up with severe schedule delays and claims. And so you're right. I think the capability of the owner's organization and how well as Jeff has said, how well that project is defined, and you can minimize the changes once you get into the execution phase. To me, that's critical to having a successful project, regardless of the contracting strategy.
All right. Okay, that's excellent. We're going to shift over to something that, again, we've touched on a couple of times in the previous discussions here, but it's around labor, and we'll try to focus on the craft or field labor, so more on the execution side here. And a lot of these issues also apply to our front-end engineering labor pool as well. But, the first item that we had mentioned kind of starting off this whole discussion was this increased activity within the local market, being, say, North America, especially focused on the U.S. Gulf Coast. And, to kind of support that, we're drawing, resources in from either non-traditional construction markets into the petrochemical space, or from, regional influences or resources coming in from, say, international locations. We also have the issue of, how are we attracting people domestically to support this influx of work, within the environment. And some of the, the industry has called the construction side of our business the 3Ds, and we've been trying to get away from that for years of, it being dirty, dangerous, and leads to divorce. And, we're trying to obviously make the change in getting away from that by having, local projects that, doesn't mean that you have to be away from home all that much, very safe environments and so on, and we'll see if we can try to address some of that. And then, the other issue too is, are we supporting the industry enough in its, with this less experienced workforce, what are some of the training and supervision activities that are going on in today's environment, and are they sufficient to be able to support the needs that we have, that we have in the industry? So Don, why don't we hear on your end, what do you see some of the either the results of this, or what are we doing about it?
Well, thanks, Steve. I'll try and solve world hunger here in 3 to 5 minutes. This is a complicated issue. It's not an easy issue, and it's not an issue that has any silver bullets. It requires a great deal of commitment from our industry and some concerted effort. And what I want to try and do is hit some of the mountaintops here in laying out the topic over the next few minutes. And let's look at what are some of the demand issues over the next 5 years. If you look at non-residential construction just in the top 5 states, the construction volume is going to exceed $1.3 trillion. If you look at that same time period in the top 5 states for the industrial market, that volume is over $500 billion. The greatest demand for skilled workers in those markets is really going to be driven by power, chemical, manufacturing, and oil and gas industries. And in there, you also have to remember that we have this base load of skilled craft professionals that need to address our existing facilities with maintenance, shutdowns, turnarounds, etc. We also have some interesting things like new markets with the gas plays, with alternative energy that's drawing on our workforce that we really haven't calculated well into our numbers of skilled workers. The one other question we hear all the time, well, how has the lower oil prices played against the shortages of skilled workers? And from everything we've seen and heard, we don't see any impact, at least in the short term, from the lower oil prices. So the bottom line issue is skilled labor demand far exceeds our supply. And when we get into that scenario, when we get into that highly competitive market, that situation means high risk for contractors and also some pretty painful cost escalation. this issue can be, greater or lesser depending on your geographic location. Part of where I got my numbers today, there is a tool called the Construction Labor Market Analyzer. You can go to www.myclma.com, which is a tool created by the Construction Users Roundtable that collects the supply information, that collects the volume of construction going on, and really helps you get a look at your geographic area as to how great or how less that labor issue might be in your area. So it's a great tool I would recommend you looking into if you're not already connected with it. But the question becomes, so what are contractors going to do in a highly competitive market? And the simple answer is they're going to do what they've always done, which is compete for skilled workers. And when contractors start competing for skilled workers, obviously the result is wages increase, per diems increase, overall employment packages go up, so costs increase, and the other thing that happens is turnover increases with workers jumping from project to project. We saw this scenario back during the Katrina-Rita hurricane recoveries. That was a very similar market to what we're seeing now and what we're going into, and I actually think this future market is going to be worse than that one. But we saw projects that had upwards of 600% turnover, simply because of the competition that was out there amongst workers or amongst contractors trying to get the best workers. The one good news in that highly competitive market is when the wages go up, typically what we see is our recruiting greatly improves. So that's, I guess, if there is a silver lining, that's a silver lining on a competitive market. The other thing that happens, as some of those discussions have happened already, is contractors look at ways that they can mitigate their risk by either changing location or timing of projects and using other risk mitigation strategies. Interestingly enough, there is a report in the Construction Industry Institute, CII, that's going to be reporting out at the conference this summer, Research Team 318, and their job was to look at, is there a demographic craft labor cliff that will affect project performance? And some of their very early findings, they show there is a direct correlation to staffing difficulties and project cost and schedule overrun, as well as safety performance. So, there's real issues associated with this kind of market, with this kind of environment, when the labor shortage issue becomes real on projects. There are things that we really have to look at and take care of. So what does this mean overall to our labor market? Going forward over the next 5 to 10 years, it's estimated that we're going to need 1.5 million to 2 million new workers just to meet the demand. Some of the other things that we're going to see within that labor market is that over that same time period, roughly 20% of our workforce will be retiring. And this is, think about this is our best workers, our most experienced workers. And the scary part about that is, one of the strategies that we use here at NCCER is when our craft workforce gets to that point where they don't want to use the tools anymore, we try to give them additional education and transition them into those frontline supervisory foreman ranks. Well, the shortages and the retirement rates in the supervisory ranks are actually projected to be much higher than even the craft ranks. So we have some serious issues as it relates both to the craft professionals and also the frontline supervisory professionals. One of the things that we have to start doing as an industry is really stop treating our craft professional, our labor workforce, as a commodity. We've done that for so many years. We seem to think, and I know during my career, my 25 to 30 years, I've seen 5 or 6 downturns now. And it seems like when we hit that downturn, we think we can simply slow down or turn off that pipeline, and then when the recovery hits, turn that pipeline back on. And what we're seeing today in our current labor market is some of the results of that constantly trying to shut the pipeline off and turn it back on. If you think about it, if I put a worker in training today, it's going to take me, using traditional training methods, a minimum of 3 years to get that worker minimally qualified to be a welder. If I really want to look at having that person develop to where they're one of your top performers, you're looking at 5 to 10 years to get them to those levels. So this isn't a short-term proposition. Developing a workforce takes time, and it's not something that you can simply say, all right, it's time to turn on the assembly line and start cranking out welders again. And we need to take account of that. You know, we do have, because of all these things over time, we do have an issue in that we don't have a broad industry-wide solution to increase that pipeline of entry-level or new workers. Through NCCER, through our Build Your Future campaign, we are working on this with a lot of folks across the country and even throughout the world on trying to look at how we can increase that pipeline. But this is something we can't do alone. We just need broader industry support and commitment to getting this done.
So Don, just on that item there, and it's kind of a two-part question here, is, you know, where do we see the biggest drain, I guess, on critical resources, or what's the biggest shortage? And you know, if you talk about this timeline that it's going to take, and obviously the cost, you know, obviously that the contractors are the one that get hit the most, but that then results in the owners have to recognize that, you know what, there's a cost that comes with this, and is that recognized throughout the industry, do you think?
Well, I think, you know, the quality contractors are putting the cost of developing their workforce into their bids. We see that all the time. And we need to focus, you know, part of the short-term solutions to this is we need to focus on what we can do to, for lack of a better term, upskill our incumbent workforce. Mm-hmm. If you look, NCCER has assessed 350,000 journeyman workers in our industry. We essentially have a 49% pass rate. And very little of those folks who did not pass that assessment have actually gone into upgrade training. Just think of the productivity increases we could have in our industry if we could upskill those folks that have not yet passed that assessment. And that's part of the short-term solution, is getting a better productive worker right now.
In that, the first question, what do you see as the skills that are the biggest gaps in today's marketplace? Where do we need the most additional resources today? You know, is it welding?
Well, welder is obviously the number one craft that people are looking for. Welders first, then probably pipe fitters, millwrights, instrument techs, those kind of things on down the line. But welders is absolutely the number one need. Like I say, it takes time to develop welders.
Right.
You know, we really need to, both owners and contractors need to become more committed to workforce development. We need owners to do what owners do well, which is make sure that they're only doing business with those contractors committed to developing the workforce. And in fact, working with the Construction Users Roundtable, NCCER has created a tool called the Contractors Workforce Development Assessment, where we can actually go in and assess the quality of a contractor's workforce development program in a pre-qualification scenario and assign a metric to it. So there's no reason why owners can't be working only with contractors committed to developing their workforce. If we get that kind of commitment, and we know when owners mandate things and commit to things, that things change, like safety did 25 or 30 years ago in our industry.
Yeah. Jeff, counterpoint on that?
No, I think, you know, Don framed it up well. I mean, and there's, you know, no magic bullets. I think, you know, we probably, as owners, been our own worst enemies, right, in some of this boom and bust stuff. And I think a lot, you know, it's like safety, right? I mean, when did we get serious about safety? It's when the owners started putting their money where their mouth is, right? And I think it's the same thing on crafts and providing careers. If we're not willing to invest in companies that provide training and will bring grow workers and grow the next generation workforce, then it's not going to be there when we need it. So I think really it gets up to the owner to understand that we're the ones that really drive this, and we need to really step up and take accountability here and really like Don said, partner and work for ways to bring people into the workforce. And if you can't provide careers, right, if it's just short-term jobs that people don't see very interesting, then we shouldn't be shocked when we don't have the people there when we need them.
Right. Manuel, any comments?
I mean, I agree 100% with everything that was said. I think as an industry, we've done a disservice in the construction industry and to the construction worker. I personally have two sons that are in the construction industry, so I'm very familiar with how that market operates and how they have to develop their own training and find their own jobs. And it's not even though they've been with the same company for a long time, they still have to hunt for work within that company because the tendency is not to take care of that labor. But on the engineering side, we have found a mitigating approach with the high-value engineering centers in Asia, but in construction we don't have as much of that ability to do that. So you can do a little bit of modulars and work outside of the country, but that's still not going to solve the problem.
Right. You got the customs and immigration constraints that we have in the U.S. when it comes to doing, engineering, being that you can send it, via the internet and so on. Construction is hard to do that way. It's pretty much site specific. So we've got about 5 more minutes, and I'd just like to kind of address a couple of these questions that came in as overall questions on all 3 topics. And one addresses that we've talked quite a bit about the resources, lack of resources on the execution side, as well as on the engineering side. What do we see as the other execution challenges that we're addressing in this marketplace? I think we touched on a couple of them. Maybe some issues around long lead items and so on. But are there any other overall execution constraints, challenges, or so on that we need to be aware of as we charge through this next 5-year period or so of high activity in the marketplace? Jeff, why don't I give that one to you to start off with, and then we'll to the other guys.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways, maybe not quite answering exactly the question, but I noticed some in here about, the price of oil and what is that doing to, our slate of projects as owners. And I think that's probably one of the challenges is, I know for us on the petrochemical side, I mean, we're, obviously low oil in a lot of ways helps us, but it also, there's some downsides to it too as far as other things. So I think one of the challenges is, it's companies trying to really kind of rebalance their portfolios, right? Certainly if you're upstream, it's a huge impact. But part of it is, I know we're going through some things now on our projects just to sort through and make sure, with the new economics, and again, somebody, put a chat thing out there if what the price of oil is going to do in the next 6 months. I'd be very interested in seeing that. So we got to figure out what does that mean? And so I think you're going to see some flux in some of the projects, which, just adds another dynamic in there, right, about what's going to happen. But I know for us in general, I mean, I can say for us, we're moving forward strongly with most of our stuff because it still makes sense. So it's not necessarily stopping things, but we are doing some reassessment in some projects that, maybe made sense for us, and really ours gets into more maybe the product pricing and some other things on the back end. But we are reassessing some things and making sure that that the projects we're doing still make sense in the, with the current economics. Yeah,
and I think, on our perspective of multiple owners that we see from the consulting side, as the industry goes through these fluctuations, if you kind of follow the trends over a long period of time, that it goes in this roller coaster ride of, ups and downs. So if you can actually execute, and obviously you got to try to get the timing right, but if you can execute in the downs, where there is a much more availability of resources and suppliers, and you should be able to get better pricing and so on and so forth. And recognizing the timeline on these projects is, it's years, not months, because of the size and complexity of them. If you can, again, trust history to kind of be a prediction of the future, that can be a very effective strategy. It's just that a lot of owners today are driven by, they fund their money out of production, and if you can't make the money on the production side, then you can't fund the projects and you can't execute. But if you've got cash, then a lot of these owners can kind of take advantage of the downturns to kind of address the needs in the upswing. Manuel, any comments on the other execution challenges that you see from a contractor standpoint?
Yeah, I think everything we touched on is right on the money and very appropriate. One comment I'd like to make is I think also as an industry, we have developed 3D technology and a lot of new things that have come out in the last 20 years. But in general, I think we've completely stagnated in that area. And I'm actually challenging the next generation, at least the people working for me in my organization, as to what is going to be next. What do we need to do to increase efficiency and get better at what we do? And I'll be honest with you, it has to be the next generation, or the next one, maybe the millennials that bring that into our industry. But we're in desperate need of new upgrades, new industry, new tools to better collaborate and work across boundaries and even engineering disciplines, how we do work. And we're kind of stuck in the mud in that area, in my opinion.
It's amazing. I was just at the CII Board of Advisor meeting, and we had one of the consulting groups kind of give their look at trends and so on. And if you take a look at I guess it's a video game or an app. I think it's called Minecraft, and the kids today absolutely love it. And it's basically just an electronic Lego where they can build cities and whole complexes and so on. And my 7-year-old niece showed me it this weekend, and she flew around this thing by taking tools to be able to dig holes. She'd take another tool to be able to build a building, and that's really, really impressive stuff, all in a video game concept. And I agree with Manuel in that's got to be kind of where we get the next generation engaged. We got a couple of minutes. Don, you have any comments? I know we have to hand it over to Brady.
Just a final comment. Yeah, this is an important issue, and nobody's going to tell the general public about our industry like our industry can. I think the primary battle we fight in getting new people into our industry, getting young, skilled, knowledgeable people into our industry, is the fact that they don't know about it. And only we can engage with the general public and tell them about it. We need to engage with local school systems, the community where we're building projects, and really tell them about the opportunities our industry holds, because it is a great industry with great career opportunities, and we're just not telling people about it.
Agreed 100%. Well, thanks, everyone. I'm going to hand it over to Brady, and he'll wrap things up.
Yeah, and I might, Steve, just make one final. I think there was a lot of comments about modularization, and let me just throw in, I think modularization, looking for different sources of labor, whether it's offshore labor or it's bringing union labor into places we haven't done before. I think all of those have to be part of this mix here, right? We can't. There's no one single solution. So I think, to me, all of those have to be part of the equation.
Agreed. Thanks, guys. Brady?
Thanks, Steve, and thank you all again for attending today's webinar. You can view it again at bicwebinars.com and pass that information along to your colleagues so they can view as well. We'd also like to thank Petrochemical Update for being our sponsor, and don't forget to check out Petrochemical Engineering and Construction 2015 and other events hosted by Petrochemical Update. Thank you all, and have a nice day.
All right, thanks, guys. So long.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.